Today from the global lane, Trump doubles down. Greenland will belong to the U.S. one way or another.
We're not going to have Russia or China occupy Greenland. It's not a question of, do you think we can do without it? We can't.
Global reckoning, the death knell of socialism and Iran's tyranny.
Terrorist regimes are failing, and that is very good for the people in the world who want to have freedom, election, free enterprise, prosperity, hospitals, schools, bridges, as opposed to war and terrorist activity.
America's religious reckoning. Freedom advances, but dark forces escalate.
There have been a number of great victories in the courts, and certainly the current administration has been more favorable, but there are still challenges. When we're fighting to stop the government from compelling us to act contrary to our conscience, we're also fighting for folks that disagree with us on many things, including biblical sexuality.
And Trump's momentous Iran decision.
I tell the Iranian leaders, you better not start shooting, because we'll start shooting too.
Strike hard, but no boots on the ground, no nation building. And it's all right here on the global lane. President Trump has made it clear that acquisition of the island nation of Greenland is in the strategic interest of the United States.
We have to have Greenland. It's not a question of, do you think we can do without it? We can't.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance met with the Danish and Greenlandic foreign ministers on Wednesday in hopes of making a deal.
We do not think that military force is ever going to be necessary. We think this makes sense. And because we think the people of Greenland are rational and good, we think we're going to be able to cut a deal, Donald Trump style, to ensure the security of this territory, but also the United States of America.
Trump has said he'll take military action, if necessary, to control Greenland.
Greenland, basically, their defense is 2 dog sleds. Do you know that? Do you know what their defense is? 2 dog sleds.
The president has made his view clear, and we have a different position. We, the Kingdom of Denmark, continue to believe that also the long-term security of Greenland can be ensured inside the current framework. Ideas that would not respect territorial integrity of the Kingdom of Denmark and the right of self-determination of the Greenlandic people are, of course, totally unacceptable.
Joining us is Young Voices senior contributor Laura Karch. Laura, first, just how important is Greenland, a real cold and icy place? Do you agree or disagree that Greenland is important to U.S. national security interests?
I would generally agree that it is in the U.S. interest to have a deal with Greenland for our security. But it is more than just about our national security as well. I mean, it's become the main arena for the race for the Arctic power between the U.S., Russia, and China, essentially. There are many key shipping routes, the Northwest Passage, Northern Sea Route. So whoever controls trade up there will control who comes in and out, essentially. Trump also recently said that we need Greenland for the Golden Dome that he's building before Russia and China take it. So it's very much a race between us and our adversaries.
Trump says China and Russia have many submarines and ships around Greenland.
If you take a look outside of Greenland right now, there are Russian destroyers, there are Chinese destroyers and bigger, there are Russian submarines all over the place. We're not going to have Russia or China occupy Greenland, and that's what they're going to do if we don't.
The Greenlandic and Danish foreign ministers say that's not so. What is the risk of those two nations taking over or dominating the waters around Greenland? What's the threat to the United States?
Well, when it comes to the Russian scare, for lack of a better phrase, there are Russian bases not far from the island, geographically speaking, in northern Russia. And so there are suspected submarines. I haven't personally seen anything that confirms it, but it sounds to me like we're avoiding another Cuban Missile Crisis repeat. And technically, the only protection we would have from any Russian submarines coming through the Atlantic would be one UK submarine base up in the Atlantic. And to be fair, there are past examples of Chinese or Russian ships who have crossed into our exclusive zone by Alaska. So it's understandable, but I wouldn't go to war immediately about it.
Would the U.S. really go to war over Greenland? Denmark says that would be an end to NATO. It seems Trump's using that threat just to get negotiations started and to reach a deal that he would find acceptable. So what do you think?
I agree. I do think that Trump's threats were a way to bring Denmark officials to the table. And officially, a Danish official said after the meeting, it's very clear that Trump still wishes to conquer Greenland, but they are willing to work with the US to find a common way forward. They teased more meetings to come, but they did mention that, the US must respect the red lines of Denmark and that Greenland will remain in our kingdom for the foreseeable future. These meetings wouldn't take place if war was seen as the only option by Trump. I do think he's being smart here, applying some classic diplomacy. And it's important to remember, too, Denmark is technically an ally, and they assisted the United States just last week in seizing an oil tanker in the Atlantic in relation to the Venezuela blockade.
Short of military action, you're advocating diplomacy. So what are you suggesting should be done to make everyone happy?
So I suggest a realistic path forward, some mutually beneficial agreement, because in my opinion, I don't think full US ownership in this day and age is likely for such a large island with 60,000 people of their own culture and language and ethnicity, so to speak. So there's a real opportunity for a strategic partnership here, potentially some kind of compact of free association. It'll preserve simultaneously the Greenlandic sovereignty while enabling economic growth for both the US and Greenland at the same time, while securing our own US interest. And who knows, in the future, that may help Greenland rely less on Denmark. The portfolio in Greenland, their economic diversity is mainly mining and fishing, but the interest of the US into the island came from the rare earth elements as well, a lot of them that we can use in our tech and defense systems. Lots of precious metals, including iron and gold, and rumored oil reserves. They say millions of barrels are available under the island itself.
Okay, Young Voices senior contributor Laura Karch, thanks for sharing your insights.
Thank you so much for having me.
Iran and Cuba, two governments nearing their end or only wishful thinking? Our next guest says the fall of the two regimes could trigger the biggest geopolitical shift since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Historian Jared Knott is the author of Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, Book 2, The Many Mistakes That Changed the World. Jared, it's good to talk with you again. So why do you believe the effect of the collapse of the communist government in Cuba and the Republic of Iran would be similar in global significance as the fall of the Soviet Union?
Issues that we're facing here in the United States with our election of a socialist mayor in New York and with what's happening across the globe is which kind of government, which kind of economy is best for the people. And you can look at how socialism has worked out in Cuba, they're in utter collapse, and how well it's worked out in Venezuela. At one point 25 years ago, they were the wealthiest country in all of Latin America. And basically under a free enterprise type system, they turned to socialism. Of course, Cuba for years has been turning to socialism. Both have just been utter, unspeakable disasters. On top of that, we have the situation in Iran. Just a year and a half ago, they were on the verge of having a nuclear weapon. They were a terrorist country spreading terrorism throughout the Middle East and throughout the world. And with the idea of them having a nuclear weapon, a terrorist organization having a nuclear weapon was nightmarish. Now they're in near collapse. Cuba is just economically has collapsed. Of course, Venezuela, we've decapitated it with its narco-terrorist leader. So a lot of progress has been made in the right direction. Have to add quickly, the work is not done. Huge amount of work still in front of the administration, but major strides have been made.
Well, I reported on the collapse of the USSR under Ronald Reagan, and I was also in Berlin and witnessed the collapse of the Berlin Wall. But that was a result of Mikhail Gorbachev's policy of glasnost and perestroika, allowing a greater amount of freedom in his country. In Iran, the Ayatollah and leadership is cracking down, even killing their people right now.
Yeah. Yes, going back to the collapse of the Soviet Union, the only thing keeping the other states there, including Ukraine and the others, the Baltic states, in alignment with the Soviet Union was there was a gun to the head of the people. You started in Hungary in 1955, and in Poland, whenever the people try to rise up to break away from the Soviet Union, there'd be a huge military force come in and crack down and kill a lot of people and force them back into compliance. once Gorbachev, to his great credit, take a more enlightened view. We're not going to put a gun to the head of the people to force them to stay in the Soviet Union. Once that gun was taken away from their head, they were in the streets by the hundreds of thousands demanding independence. And the Soviet Union just collapsed completely, no longer exists. We have Russia, of course, but we don't have the Soviet Union. We have Mr. Putin, who wants very much to put his mark on history, like rebuilding the Soviet Union, which I don't think is going to be possible. But that's a whole ugly chapter of history that ended up going the right way. Basically, you can call it the collapse of socialism and proving that once again, socialism doesn't work. I go down to, it seems like we have to learn it every generation. You look at Venezuela and Cuba, see that it doesn't work now anymore better than it did 30 years ago. A different situation with Iran. The terrorist regimes are failing, and that is very good for the people in the world who want to have freedom, election, free enterprise, prosperity, hospitals, schools, bridges, as opposed to war and terrorist activity.
Well, I think a lot of the parallels may be between Reagan and what he did and Bush, what he did against the Soviets, and today with Trump, sanctions and taking economic measures to strangle them economically. That really seems to be making a difference. But what parallels do you see with other historic events?
Well, the history, because it does not have one continuous flow in one direction. It'll be heading one direction, sometimes take a right turn to the right or a turn to the left. You go back to the American Revolution, that was a major turn away from being dominated, one country being dominated by another. That was certainly a major turn in the right direction. I guess you could even count, some people would even count the Alamo and Texas winning its independence, because that opened up manifest destiny. Some people say it was a bad thing, but I think it's a good thing. This idea from sea to shining sea, an American country dominating, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific, that was you call that a turning point. The defeat of Germany in World War I and certainly in World War II, that was it was something of a close call. That was a major turning point in history. The collapse of the Soviet Union, of course, being another we just mentioned, and then now with the collapse, or near collapse of Cuba, and with the decapitation of the narco-terrorists in Venezuela. And just a year and a half ago, again, we had a terrorist organization, as I mentioned, close to getting the nuclear weapons. Can you imagine a worse nightmare than terrorists having a nuclear weapon? We were very close to that. Now that's been washed down the drain, and we're going in a completely different direction. That could be considered a major turning point also. And I will point out that usually in history, fortunately, that democracies have a tendency to win over totalitarian interests or totalitarian regimes. That's not always true, but generally speaking, democracy is winning. Slowly, carefully, sometimes it's difficult to do, very difficult to do, but democracy seems to be winning and have for these last 250 years.
Okay, so we may be on the verge of something big here. Historian Jared Knott, author of Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, Book 2, The Many Mistakes That Changed the World. Thank you, Jared. We appreciate you being with us. Religious freedom is at the very heart of what it means to be an American. Our founders ensured its protection in the U.S. Constitution. Now, as we celebrate 250 years since America's founding, it's worth asking, how are we doing when it comes to religious liberty? Well, joining us to share his thoughts is Ryan Tucker, ADF Senior Counsel and member of the Advisory Board of Lay Leaders of the Religious Liberty Commission. So, Ryan, how's the nation faring on religious liberty in 2026, say, compared to 2025 or even 2024?
Sure. Well, there have been a number of great victories in the courts, and certainly the current administration has been more favorable, but there are still challenges. For example, several states and local governments have increased pressure on people of faith during this time. I'm currently litigating matters, for example, in Vermont, in Michigan, and Washington, where religious people and organizations have been treated less than others. And so overall, there's been a number of great victories and great strides made in that space, but there's a lot of work still left to be done.
Well, what recent Supreme Court cases have upheld or protected religious freedom? Which ones stand out to you as the most significant recent ones?
I'd say 303 Creative, that's an ADF case involving a Christian web designer who wanted to expand her business to include weddings, but Colorado law required her to create websites celebrating same-sex marriage or face penalties, and she simply couldn't do that. So she was forced to litigate. The court fortunately said that she can't be forced to speak a message that she disagreed with. They said that a government may not, compel an individual or a business to create speech that contradicts their sincerely held religious beliefs. Or you can look at cases like Mahmoud from this last term that recognize parental rights and public education, particularly the right to not have children compelled to participate in instruction that substantially burdens the family's religious beliefs. Or, two cases that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that aren't really framed as religious liberty cases per se, but absolutely will have an impact on people of faith are the two cases that were argued this week. That's the Little case and the BPJ case. Idaho and West Virginia passed laws protecting women's sports. There are two sexes. There's male, there's female, as the Bible clearly defines. But those laws protecting those girls were challenged. They made their way to the U.S. Supreme Court. They were argued this week. And I think those cases are monumental. They will impact culture for generations to come. So I would encourage your viewers to be on the lookout for those decisions in the coming months.
And we can't forget the Joe Kennedy case there where he was allowed to pray after football games. He didn't coerce anyone to do it, but his teammates or his football team joined in on that. So any recent disappointments, though, cases where the court ruled against the protection of religious rights?
Well, I would maybe go back to the last term where we had a case called Drummond, where the issue was whether or not you can have religious charter schools. That question, fortunately, is still an open question. The court tied 4-4. The reason that there weren't 9 justices there is Justice Amy Coney Barrett recused herself from that decision. So I expect a case like that to make its way back to the U.S. Supreme Court probably fairly soon.
What effect do you think the Religious Liberty Commission is having in advancing religious freedom, and what do you expect to see in the commission report that is due in July?
Well, each month for the last half year or so, we've been holding public hearings, hearing testimony from a number of different individuals, some ADF clients, some First Amendment and religious liberty scholars. We've been tasked with researching, listening to this public testimony, and ultimately we're going to provide a comprehensive report to the president on the foundations of religious liberty in the United States and current threats to it. We're going to recommend executive or legislative steps also to safeguard those freedoms. So I look forward to the months ahead. There's a lot of work to be done, but we're going to accomplish it. A
lot of challenges with rising anti-Semitism out there in America. And Americans United for the Separation of Church and State and the ACLU contend religious liberty is being misused as, quote, a license to discriminate against LGBTQ and people of minority faiths. So what's your response to that allegation?
Well, it's the exact opposite. Look, religious liberty claims arise because the government is compelling, conduct or compelling speech or compelling participation contrary to our conscience. So, when we're fighting to stop the government from compelling us to act contrary to our conscience, we're also fighting for folks that disagree with us on many things, including biblical sexuality. And, I'd also add that, on the Religious Liberty Commission, I'm an advisor there, as you mentioned, and we have a number of folks from minority faiths as well that are participating in those discussions.
Okay, so happy Religious Freedom Day, January 16th. Ryan Tucker of ADF. And as you say, Religious Liberty Commission Advisory Board member, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
President Trump faces a momentous decision on Iran. Although the Maduro capture operation called Absolute Resolve went off without a hitch, Iran presents an even tougher challenge. For decades now, the United States has shown the world that its military stands second to none. And by now, the world knows the president won't think twice about using that power. Trump has made it clear, if the regime starts killing its own people, the U.S. will respond and respond forcefully.
I tell the Iranian leaders, you better not start shooting because we'll start shooting too.
But what will Trump do now that the Ayatollah has crossed that red line and thousands of protesters have been killed? He's already imposed a 25% tariff on countries that do business with Iran. And if he orders military strikes to help the Iranian people remove their despotic leaders, what happens next? Will it mean boots on the ground? An occupation to make sure democracy takes hold? Folks, the American people are tired of endless wars, insurgencies, and occupations. Nation building is not our mission right now, not in Iran, not in Venezuela, not in Gaza, or anywhere else. The idea of nation building really took off after World War II, when Europe was rebuilt with the Marshall Plan. That was economic development to help restore nations. But President John F. Kennedy took it a step further. He believed the American military and CIA could be used to change regimes and make nations safe for democracy. Listen to what JFK said during his inaugural address in January 1961.
Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
Yes, JFK inspired the world and me as a child. But folks, advancing liberty through nation building is no easy task. It seldom succeeds, and too often it ends in tragedy. Take a moment to think back. After the U.S. left Vietnam, Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge took control in Cambodia. They slaughtered teachers, doctors, lawyers, and other educated professionals, the country's intelligentsia. 3 million people were killed. Now, fast forward 35 years after the U.S. withdrew from Iraq, ISIS rose up and established a caliphate in Syria. Thousands of ethnic Yazidis were victims of genocide, rape, and torture. Shia Muslims and Christians also fell victim to ISIS mass killings. And after 22 years of nation building in Afghanistan, nearly 2,500 American service members lost their lives. 4,500 died in the Iraq War. The cost to American taxpayers, about $8 trillion spent on war-related expenses from those two conflicts. So, Mr. President, be wise in the next steps forward in Iran, Venezuela, Gaza, and elsewhere. Help others find freedom, but don't make a choice that you and your nation will regret later. As you told Republicans meeting last week at the Kennedy Center, people will forget all the good things you've done and remember the one mistake you make just before the election. In this case, boots on the ground will likely cost you and the Republicans their majority in Congress in November. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.